Welcome to the Twinkle Talks EYFS podcast. Working in the early years is busy, funny, messy, and exhausting. Join me, Shana, some of the Twinkle EYFS team, special guest speakers, and other early years practitioners as we talk honestly about our experiences. Whether you're listening for CPD, on your commute, or to help you relax, Twinkle EYFS will share everything you need to know about all things early years. Back again, ladies. Third time's the charm.
You know it.
Woo! Episode number 3, communication and language. I feel like, you know, the Fast and Furious films. I feel like we need a voiceover. Like,
oh yeah, that would be good.
no, that'd be like, you know,
Episode 3.
communicate exactly with Julia and Louise back again. Like,
Dun, dun, dun.
today's episode is something a bit more familiar with me because this is the age group I was more working with. Well, some of them. We're going from toddlers to then 3, 4, and 5-year-olds. Now, we had a discussion about this very thing before we even started recording. I was panicking a little bit because our second episode started with pre-birth and babies going up to 12 months. And then our next episode is talking about toddlers and 3s, 4s, and 5-year-olds. And I thought, oh, what about 1 to 2-year-olds? But Lou has enlightened me. I've been thinking toddlers wrong the entire time. I thought they were 2-year-olds.
I was never sure actually when toddlers became toddlers. I think there's quite a big discussion in early years and beyond. What age is toddlers?
Not at all. You haven't been thinking of anything wrongly. So a toddler is normally thought between the ages of 1 and 3. It's a bit of a discussion, like you said, in early years as to what age a toddler becomes a toddler. But I think the general consensus is that a toddler is a child aged from 1 to 3 years old. And really particularly thinking about when they start to be able to toddle, which is where the word toddler has sort of derived from, it's come from.
Oh yeah, that kind of makes sense when you think about it, doesn't it? It's like toddling, toddler, that's why. So it's whenever they start to walk kind of vibe.
Yeah, and normally a child starts to walk from the age of 12 months up, would normally be around the age that children would start to toddle and to walk. So yeah, so the term toddler is normally we look at the ages between 1 and 3.
That's really helpful because there's me thinking, oh my gosh, we're doing toddlers and 3 to 5-year-olds. I was like, but what about the 1 to 2-year? It's a toddler, Shana. You need to get a grip. So that's really nice because I can go back on the website now for Twinkle and be like, oh, all of the toddler stuff actually is that age group as well. And I bet there are some listeners that have done exactly the same as me. Hopefully, maybe it's just me.
I definitely think that when we were making the resources, we definitely had quite a conversation about it. Right?
Yeah. Okay. We've already talked about pre-birth and babies up to 12 months. Now we're going to look at the toddling age, which is between 1 and 3 generally, and then we'll do sort of 3 to 5. It's making sense. So we're going to do a similar sort of ilk to what we were doing in the other episodes. And again, it might sound like an obvious question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. What is the role of communication and language for 1 and up to 5? And why is it so important for them to have so much development in communication and language at this stage?
I mean, much like what we were saying with babies and also in our general podcast, communication and language is just so important in the early years, and that doesn't change from 1 and above. I mean, between ages 1 and 5, their communication and language will develop so rapidly. They'll increase their vocabulary and their ability to express themselves and their general understanding as well. So we will break up those levels within those different areas, but it just so much progress will happen. If you've ever worked in the early years, you'll know that to be true. But it's so important because it helps them kind of communicate their emotions, their interests, their preferences. It's so important for all other learning to build on. It allows them to play cooperatively and also kind of express their creativity and imagination. And it's so important for their confidence and their independence and their self-esteem. It's just so valuable for their overall development. They can kind of exchange for longer with others and also problem solve and be a bit more critical in their thinking when they have that ability to communicate with others.
I wasn't sure if this was right, but you guys can advise me on this. the reason that we sort of separated these episodes into sort of pre-birth and babies and then age 1 and up, you'd think, oh, hang on, like 1 and up, that's a massive age range. And there's going to be a drastic difference between a 1-year-old's level of communication language compared to a 5-year-old's. But did we try and do it as like pre-speech and then speech and post-speech? Is that what we were going for here?
It was linking to that, actually, because we split up after 1. We also included speech sounds, and we didn't do that for babies because obviously a lot of them are not yet using speech sounds. And so we found that it was easier to talk about toddlers and 3 to 5-year-olds together, because there's a lot of that builds on those skills from toddlers that you then continue to build on and work on as they're 3 and 5. So I feel like they do go together more naturally, whereas babies is a very, very different stage of development.
I would completely agree with that. I think they naturally go together in the way that we've organised the podcasts. I would also think that in terms of how children, when they get from 1 up to 5, they're actually communicating more through not only the spoken word, but also how they're using their gestures and their language. It's different to how a baby would be doing that. So yeah, it felt right to be organising the podcasts in that way.
Yeah, and this is probably a little bit like on a tangent, but I don't know a lot about babies, so I'm guessing or assuming that like 12 months is quite a big milestone for a child, and like you say, they're moving more, they're developing and processing more there, so it's kind of not just in communication language but physically, which is why their gestures are developing, and their social awareness is developing more, which is why it's different after the age of 1. Like, is the year 1 quite important?
It obviously varies for every child, doesn't it, where what they reach by the time that they are 1, but in that first year of life they're rapidly developing and making connections and growing their brain. And then from the age of 1, they're sort of starting to almost build and make connections on all of that they've been nurturing for a year. The building blocks are growing and they're making connections, and they're able to sequence things more, and
they're able to put all of those skills together more.
But just building on what Lou said, I think it's always important to remember that we're not saying if children don't hit these markers that we've talked about before they turn 1, then anything's a problem at all, but just a way of grouping things. So things might happen before or after that, and they might not develop these things until later, and that's okay, because like Lou says, every child is different, and everyone will have their unique journey within communication and language. And so we found this the best way to group things, but it doesn't mean that that's the be end.
No, it's good to know, because I think that's quite an important thing to remember as well. So let's break it down then. So like we did before, we'll go into the sort of the key areas of all communication and language. I would say I can see the biggest change in attention and listening between the ages of 1 and 5. Like you can visually see that progression, right? What's going on in that field?
So I think from about the age of 1 to sort of 2 years old, they are able to start to be able to concentrate for short periods of time, but obviously longer than when they were in the sort of the baby age, particularly when something really interests them and they're engaged and stimulated by it. Toddlers in this age will often show high levels of engagement, particularly with things like songs and games like peekaboo and ready steady go games. They will be able to listen to short stories, and particularly things like lifting the flap type books and peekaboo books, really starting to attend for short periods of time. And then as they progress between the ages of sort of 2 to 3, again they'll be increasing their concentration and their focus, possibly to sort of things that maybe are further distance away from them. So everything when they're sort of 1 to 2 and in babies is very close to them, but as they get older they can start to tune into things in the world around them a bit more. They'll be able to focus for longer durations, and they'll be able to probably tune in for longer periods of time in noisier environments. Although they will find noisy environments a challenge, they will start to be able to cope with those distractions maybe a little bit more, but they will find larger groups still a challenge. So obviously when we're thinking of provision and in inner settings, smaller groups obviously would be much more beneficial for them, and they'll be able to start responding well if an adult gains their full attention, and that's really important.
Yeah, full being the key word right
yes.
Yeah. So really tuning in with them, getting down to their level and calling their name first and waiting for them to have your full attention before engaging with them. And as they then progress to 3 and 4, we're thinking that they will be able to listen to longer stories and attend for longer periods of time. They'll be focusing on one activity at a time, but they will be able to focus and then refocus themselves. So say, for example, they get distracted and their focus switches, they'll be able to then refocus themselves if it's something that they're very interested in. And then as they progress to 4 to 5, we're thinking that they will be holding quite flexible attention skills. So they'll be able to focus on an activity and also listen to an instruction or understand what somebody else is saying to them without the need to stop. They'll be listening to increasing length of stories and songs, and they'll be able to recall some things from them. So if we're thinking in a setting, you'll be able to read a longer picture book and be able to talk to them about it, and they'll be able to recall parts of those elements of the story. And they'll be able to listen in more varied situations. So 1-to-1, small groups, and then probably larger groups. And obviously when the conversation interests them, they'll be much more engaged and focused on participating in that. So over the ages, we're looking at really seeing a shift in how long they can attend for something and focus and concentrate for and switch between attention.
Yeah, do you know what? I know this is probably a bit nerdy of me, but I found everything you just said really interesting because 2 things. Is it, and I know you're not doctors or anything, but is part of that to do with that their ears are still developing? So are their ears still trying to tune in and know when things are close to them as well as far away, but tune far away out and focus on the in? Or is that a brain thing, not just an ear thing?
I think what you've just said makes perfect sense. I think there is a lot of internal stuff. There is a lot going on. Sensory development is obviously developing alongside all of their ability to be able to listen and attend to something. So yes, I would definitely say sensory development is vital to be developing alongside, which is why the early years is so important, because that's what, we're thinking about the environment and what experiences children can get and how children can tune into things. That's part of sort of everyday practice.
Do you know, it kind of makes me feel a bit silly, and I feel bad because I don't know a lot about that earlier process, but I feel like I've taken hearing for granted. You just assume if, a child can hear me, it's just hearing, it's just one thing, but it's not. There's so many elements that you've just described. It's about tuning in, it's about being able to look at different things. Another thing I feel like perhaps I've taken for granted in this whole focus and attention sort of area of communication language is that multitasking and refocusing. And you know what? This is a bit weird actually that this has come up because, and I'll be very open about this, I'm in therapy. And my therapist told me last week I have to do these refocusing and attention activities. Yeah, because one of the things that we found as a trigger for me was large crowds. Social interaction for me, I find really difficult. And I love my friends. I love going to see them. But afterwards, I need to be alone. Like I need to decompress and process. Yeah. And he was like, why do you think that is? And I was like, well, I don't know. Maybe I just don't like people. And he was like, no, because you're trying to tune in to everything. And he was like, your brain's going crazy. You're focusing on yourself because you're self-conscious. And what are you doing? You need to refocus your attention. So then he gave me some activities to do this week about training my focus. It was like, you need to focus on something, give it all your attention, think about it, think about all of the senses about it, and then gradually add more things in, like focus your attention to something else, then bring it back, then switch to this one, then add a third one in. And it's just so strange because that didn't even occur to me as a skill. I just thought, just you do it. But you're saying there, Lou, it's like it's a genuine skill that you have to develop.
It's the sensory integration and sensory processing that anybody, whether it's a child or an adult, everything that you're experiencing, you need time to process that and to internalize it. So for a young child to be able to pick up sound and make sense of it and feel comfortable with it, it takes time. And I think alongside everything you've just said, which was really interesting, There's the whole internal senses of the vestibular sense and knowing where you are. If you move your head from side to side, all of that's going to affect how you hear, and absolutely fascinating that communication and language isn't just communication and language. When you actually start to think about how we're developing, it's much, much bigger.
Early years in general, because I feel like when you talk to people outside of the early years, they're kind of like, oh, you're doing nothing but playing down there. And you're like, but it's because you don't understand in many ways how much development they're going through, all these stages. It's the same thing we do. Oh, just listening, that's not that hard to help develop it. It's like, wow, there's so many skills within that. There's so many elements that we do, and like you say, almost for granted that we do, until you have these sort of conversations, Shana, that you were saying, oh, I find this tiring, or I find this difficult, because it is a big process and it takes a lot from you. And that's why children are learning so much when they're little, and they're so tired because they're developing in so many ways that we can't see straight away, but we can appreciate more when we have these conversations.
Yeah, and it's that whole, oh, why aren't they listening to me? Well, is it that they're overstimulated? Is it that they haven't got the skill to refocus yet? Maybe they haven't got certain types of skill. There's so much more. Let's break down what listening actually means, and it's loads. Like, very fascinating. Thank you for that. Very intrigued already. That was just one part of communication and language for this age group. I suppose we'll go on to the obvious then, what we would see in these age groups. Speech sounds. So what is the development typically? Because this is a tricky one for me, because you get phonics involved and all sorts. But what would a typical speech sound progression look like?
Speech sounds we kind of pulled out because we felt like at this age it's really nice to appreciate all those elements that they're learning within speech sounds. So from 1 to 2, they're developing their ability to articulate and enunciate. And so they needed to coordinate many different parts of the mouth. So again, like once you dig into it, it's quite complicated. They're coordinating their lips, their tongue, their jaw. I mean, all of this takes time for them to figure out how it works. And they may be kind of making noises like babbling and gesturing, and they may be trying to imitate sounds that they hear. And they're also going to be like repeating single words. And it might not always be clear. And I think a lot of us know that when we start to interact with children that age, there's a big difference between children that might be easier to understand, and then also kind of what words that they're starting to say. So they might also miss certain sounds off the end of words, like if they're trying to say cup, they haven't quite got to that end sound. So, I mean, there's lots of things that they're still in development between 1 and 2. So that will vary quite a lot. And then when they're going to get to 2 and 3, they'll often have the ability to produce a lot more speech sounds, but they may experience difficulty in producing the sound in the words and phrases and find it easier ways to say words. So they may be saying them slightly differently. And that's like, it's a phase I feel like a lot of parents and carers like to talk about, the way they say things, and we'll remember later and say, oh, do you remember how you used to say that? That's like a cute thing, but that's what they're developing at that age. So they'll have like a growing range of words that they may be using, be trying to say harder words as well that will have kind of more phonetics in them, but they might still find it difficult to pronounce that last letter, for example, and say shorter words for bigger ones. So instead of banana, they might be saying nana, something like that. And again, that's something that parents might talk about, caregivers might talk about later.
Well, speaking of Nana, my brother, when he was born, he couldn't say Shana, so he would call me Nana, and that's just stuck. That was my nickname forever. I was like Nana,
and it's hard.
It was cute. Yeah, shut is a really hard sound, and he said Nana, and it made everyone go, oh, so it got stuck.
Yeah. And this is why a lot of there's a not competition, but some might say competition between certain parents about what word's going to be said first, like whose name. But again, that's purely often because certain sounds are easier to say than others. So it's usually related to that, not saying who's the favorite. And then between 3 and 4, they'll be saying a lot more speech sounds, but again, still might be missing that last sound on the end of the word. But they'll show a bit more awareness about the start and the end of sounds that sound similar. But they'll also be using more of the future tense and the past tense, but struggle maybe with irregular tenses and plurals, which is very normal because English is quite complicated to be honest.
It is indeed. Yeah.
And then 4 and 5, they'll use quite a wide range of speech sounds by that time. And then they'll kind of develop the ability to identify the initial sound of words. So again, this might come a bit earlier, might come a bit later, and they'll be able to recognize rhyme a bit better and whether a word sounds similar, which is nice, and use some kind of consonant blends. But they'll still have difficulty, of course, with longer and trickier words and putting those in slightly different orders sometimes. So one of our examples was saying flutterby instead of butterfly.
Aww.
All these ones, I feel like they're very cute.
They
Talk
are.
about a lot. But yeah, there's a lot of development between 1 and 5.
Yeah, and again, I just feel like this, if you really break it down, it's so much more than just what sound can they say. Because if you think about it, we take a lot of care for children developing their fine and gross motor skills. Like we did episodes on that. We did a series on that, didn't we? About look at the different stages because it's a physical process. But learning how to speak also is like, it's different parts of the mouth. There's so many more muscles to use to say than there is to say duh. Like you're just using your tongue, but has got like all of the other muscles in your mouth. And that is, like you say, Julia, that's why it's easier to say da than ma because it's so much less muscle. And it's fascinating that more attention needs to be put on the actual physical development of learning to speak. The sound sh in my name is one of the last sounds that you learn as a child. It's like sh and th is like, because obviously children will say think and replace the sound with an F, and everyone's like, oh, it's just because they haven't been brought up. No, it's because it's a really difficult sound and that F is easier.
A really good point, Shana, because if you think of how provision for speech sounds and talk in our education system, we don't spend time breathing, and we obviously spend time breathing but we don't spend time playing with how the breath is in our mouth and how our mouth can look in different ways. And we would do that through producing a sound probably in a discrete session. But we're talking 1-year-old, 2-year-old, 3, are we giving enough attention to the physicality of speech, sound and talk?
And by the time there's a problem, the children will probably go to a speech therapist and they'll be doing those exercises. And you're like, if everyone did them at the beginning, maybe. Anyway, I'm just maybe going off a tangent there, but it's fascinating. There's so much more to it.
The other side of that is the processing it takes for a very young child to even think about how am I going to move my mouth. There's processing skills involved in that as well, isn't there? So if we spent longer attending to what our faces are doing and what our mouths and things, then that would help with the processing of how to get the sound out.
And I think what can be helpful to empathize with young children is when you think about if you've ever tried to learn another language, because there are sounds in other languages that we don't have. And just the process of trying to make those sounds when you've never moved your mouth and your lips and your tongue in that way is absolutely fascinating. And actually, sometimes they say that you might not ever be able to make exactly the right sound because you never learned that as a child. It's just thinking about how big a process they're going through.
It's mad. Like my mind is blown and I'm loving it. I mean, I'm a nerd about communication and language anyway, but it's just like, this is what it's all about. And I love it. And I hope our listeners are getting a lot out of it. I'm sure they are. I noticed as well in a lot of the documents on Twinkle and all the training and stuff that you provide, you separated speech sounds with talking as different developments. Talk to me about talking then. Why is that different and what kind of the progression is there?
Well, obviously there's the physical side of speech, isn't there? Which is what we've just attended to. But there's also the other side of it, which is thinking about expressing words, expressing sentences, and the understanding, which we'll come to separately in a moment. So when we're thinking about talking between the ages of 1 and 2, we're thinking about the tools that they have to communicate. That's not just the spoken, maybe it's the gesture with the spoken to indicate that they're trying to tell somebody something. So in that age, they're thinking about talking, repeating words that they hear. They're putting short phrases and sentences together with maybe 2 or 3 words. So it's the communicating of something that they need to tell. I think that's possibly the best way to explain it. So, for example, a 1 to 2 year old might be saying more milk. So they're trying to convey a message to you. They might be asking simple questions to find out more, and they're starting to use single words to make requests. So it's the spoken words to convey something that they need or to tell somebody something. As they progress to sort of 2 to 3, they might start talking about themselves and showing an interest in joining in with others. So they use their talk, maybe sounds and gestures, to interact with others around them. So they'll be starting to use increasing range of words. They might start to be using pronouns like I or she or me. They might ask quite a lot of questions. Because at this stage they're wanting to find out more, so they might be going, "What's that?"
Oh my god, yeah, literally. What's that? What's that? What's that?
I mean, that's my nephew's favorite phrase at the moment. He's like, "What's that? What's that?"
Oh,
It's a da.
Yeah, it's very lovely. So they'll be talking in phrases and very short sentences. They might be stuttering at this stage, and that's because they're trying to find the words to communicate something, but they're finding that difficult to process. So they might stutter or stammer at this stage, and that can sometimes lead to a little bit of frustration as they're finding it difficult to express. And then as they progress to sort of 3 to 4, they're starting to develop clearer speech. So others around them, particularly caregivers, when they're tuning in with them, they'll find it more easily to understand. They might be joining in with rhymes and speaking those words within the rhymes and remembering them in a sequence. They might be starting to join their sentences together using words like and but, and they'll start to join in with conversations more, but they can sometimes jump topic to topic. And then they might start beginning to tell a very simple story, and it might be something about them. That's because it's very important to talk about them at that stage, but it's their story, isn't it? And I think that's really important to recognize that their experiences are their story, and that's where they first want to communicate something to you. So as we move to 4 and 5, then they're starting to maybe use some intonation in how they talk, a bit more rhythm to how they're speaking and phrasing, to make themselves clearer to others. They'll take part in longer conversations. They'll probably stay on topic more, not always. And they'll more than likely at this age, they'll be able to imaginative play, because they'll find it easier to have a range of words and obviously talk in sentences a bit easier by this stage using some story language. So yeah, that's sort of the journey of talking from 1 to 5.
I like it. I like the sort of analogy as well. So it's like speech sounds are more the mechanics of vocalizing, and talking is more about the meaning and how they use it. Look at that. Okay. And lastly, like you said, Lou, certainly not least, all of that all together, understanding. So there's obviously a big link between all of these. As the children are moving through their focus and attention, they're able to hear more, they're able to listen more, they're able to express more. How does that fit in with understanding then?
I think this is where the talking and understanding elements go very hand in hand. So some of what we've been talking about in the talking stage go hand in hand with the understanding, because they'll be using words, but they need to also be developing what that understanding of that word and how to put it together. So they sort of go very closely hand in hand. But then you could say that about all of them. They all go hand in hand with each other. So
they do.
So, yeah.
And also our non-verbal children, they're still communicating. They can still show understanding without talking. So there's, it's still definitely a different skill. So
like you said, from ages kind of 1 to 2, they can usually understand more words than they can say, and that obviously includes children that aren't saying anything yet. So they can point to familiar objects when an adult names something, for example. They can kind of understand simple instructions, and also if they are starting to talk, they're going to start using simple names for things that are quite familiar to them, such as a cup, and refer to themselves by name as well. And they'll start to enjoy and maybe remember some simple songs, rhymes involving actions. And then as they move on to 2 to 3, most children are usually able to understand many words. And so they kind of start to follow and remember a simple short story with pictures and develop kind of simpler language concepts such as big and little, and kind of develop that vocabulary and understand and answer kind of simple who, what, where questions too. So developing and building on their understanding. Also, they'll be able to not only kind of point and find those objects that they'll have talked about and started to recognize when they were 1 to 2. And then moving on to 3 to 4, the wider vocabulary will develop, be able to ask even more questions. You might get a lot of why questions. I know that I got the best questions when I was teaching. It was just like, why does the phone ring? And then you'd answer a question and we're like, yeah, but why? And you're like, when you ask so many whys, you're like, I honestly don't know anymore.
Yeah.
You realize how little you know when they start really getting a hang of asking questions. They'll start using describing words for different things to describe kind of things in the past and the future. And they'll also kind of be able to respond and add more detail to questions that they're asked, and also talk a little bit more about emotions and story. And then 4 to 5, they'll continue to build on that and be able to kind of understand longer instructions and be able to understand the humor in stories as well, which is nice, and more complicated vocabulary such as might or maybe, and then vocabulary in specific kind of shapes, textures as well, and when to use them. So all kind of building on that understanding of longer instructions, more complicated things and stories, and building on all of that learning to understand things in a more complex and in-depth way, really.
Do you know what I found really interesting there? Like, I knew things, like prepositions, in, on, under, in between, like you were talking about, but I didn't realize, I think they're called infinitives or something like that, but like might, maybe, could be, should be. I didn't know that was kind of included in that same process, that actually they might not know, they might not know what might means yet. It's either it is or it is. It's very black and white, isn't it? But actually there's a potential.
It's not black and white. It's not quite clear. So when we're communicating with younger children, you want to be very clear to them so that they do understand, and then you're able to add that kind of complexity of maybe it might happen when they're able to understand what maybe might mean.
Yeah, and you know what? We say that quite a lot, I would say, to younger children, perhaps even to toddlers, like, oh, are we going to go to so-and-so today? Maybe.
I know, it's quite a big concept.
Yeah, and the poor kid's like, the hell is this word? What does that mean? Yes or a no? That's all I need. Yeah, and it's like, no wonder they keep asking, because it's like they have no concept of what maybe means. I never thought of that before.
It's the same about later, isn't it? Using the word later. I always think we all use that.
Time is a really hard concept for them to learn.
So when you start to unpick some of the language that we use with children, which we don't actually realize, it might sound like a simple word, but actually is it a simple word?
Yeah.
In the context that we're using it in as well.
Because even if you were trying to explain maybe, I was just thinking, you could say, oh, we might go, we might not go. You're just using the word might there. That's not helpful if they don't know that either.
And at the end of the day, we're probably using maybe or later to sort of appease the child and not say no, because we know if we say that word, then potential tantrums might take place, because that's just natural for those children to regulate those emotions when they can't do something that they want to do. So we're trying to avoid that. But in doing so, we're using vocabulary that their brain can't process. So are we actually helping the child? Interesting. Oh, I love it. Okay. So with all this in mind, then, let's try and put our brains back together from being blown from all of this amazing information. Let's try and put it all back together. What are we, as the educators, as caregivers in this time and in the environments that we use, what can we do to support that development then at these crucial stages?
Well, there's quite a lot. And actually some of the things that we touched on in the last podcast actually are all still relevant, because obviously they're still developing and growing and changing. So all those things that we said last time, they are still relevant here. But particularly for the toddler phase, spending time watching and listening to them and observing what they're doing and exploring and playing with them alongside, supporting them in that play. So get really focusing on going with where the child's interest is really, really important, and then bringing in language into that. Obviously mindful not to just overwhelm and fill the silence that the child might need actually at that time with language. So not overwhelming, but picking out sometimes if they try and engage with you and they show you, say, for example, a car, then you could say, yes, it's a car. So keeping it really short, not expecting them at that stage to repeat what you've said, but just giving them some of the very starts of some language that they can start to take in and process. And then also thinking about how many times a child needs to hear a word and understand it before they actually start to use it themselves. So when you're teaching new vocabulary or trying to expand their vocabulary, they'll need to hear that word in a lot of different contexts. So for example, going back to the car, you could say, look, it's a car, or the car is driving, or wow, it's a fast car. Bye car, so they hear the word in different parts of the sentence. Yeah, and that's really important. Obviously, those were loads of different ways you could explore that, but not to do it all at the same time. But they will need, not to just fill the play with lots of different sentences, but just they need to have heard the word car a lot before they will then understand it and be able to say it. Using really short, simple sentences, like we've said before, simplifying language, cutting it down, breaking it down so that it's not overwhelming. So if a child says something like dog, you want to say, yes, a dog, rather than saying, yes, it's a lovely dog, isn't it? That's just too much. So really shortening their language. And at the same time, using sound alongside, vocalizing sounds that things say. Children will quite often at this stage, they'll say the sound that something makes, like brum, brum. So, supporting that with going, yes, the car goes brum, brum, so that they're understanding the sort of the difference between it's a car, but it makes a sound brum, brum. And giving choices is really, really vital at toddler stage and actually later on, because they can find language quite overwhelming and frustrating at this stage because it's quite a lot to process. Giving children choices like, do you want the car or the bus? So that they can actually choose either with gesture or with using their words, it doesn't matter. And you can again do that for snack time or lunchtime or any instance, so that actually they haven't got to find the words, they're actually being given the words that they then have to choose. Gaining their attention and building in time to play games that actually are fun and engaging, but they do build on attention skills. So simple, engaging games like peekaboo, ready, steady, go type games, and playing with mirroring as well. Just interacting and talking with them. I already mentioned that, but just sitting alongside them and narrating their play sometimes and copying what they're doing and just interacting with them, which I said just, and I shouldn't have said just interacting with them, because that's just so important. Yeah, so that's sort of, I would say, for a toddler, lots of that is obviously really important. And again, as you progress into 3 to 5, all of those are also very important to still be doing, but you're thinking of building maybe scaffolding to develop longer sentences and adding in descriptive language. When they get to ages 3 to 5, they're sort of doing more social play and social communication skills, and that they really start to, it's not just all about me anymore, it's about the others around me, and they'll need quite a lot of support at that stage, because it's a big thing, isn't it, learning to play alongside and then interact with others and having the talk and the processing skills for that. So as an educator or caregiver, you can do that by supporting alongside, letting them take the lead, you copying what they're doing, narrating what they're doing, and encouraging those talk experiences with others.
Just like the having fun, and especially for caregivers, the narrating is an interesting one to talk about, because I think a lot of caregivers like, I don't really know what to say, I don't know what to do. And it's not that you have to say or do anything really specific, especially when they're younger, but just talking through what you're doing. I think someone said once, commentate as if you're a sports commentator or something. And it's like a nice idea to have in your mind, because you sometimes think, oh, what should I be saying when I'm playing? Should I be thinking about specific vocabulary? And you can overthink it massively. But if you're just talking through very simply what you're doing when you're doing it, that's so interesting for them to watch and observe and soak in, because it's all in context as well.
So another thing which we didn't mention is giving children time before you then jump in and
So
try and
true.
fill the gap,
Yeah.
because I think we're very good at asking questions or joining in with their play and trying to engage in whatever way, but children can sometimes not be looking at you, but they can be processing what you're saying, and they might just need that little bit of gap, that longer bit of time, and then they'll say something. And if we as educators or caregivers jump in too quickly, that moment is then lost, because now they're having to process the next bit that we've said. So really thinking about being sensitive and giving children time to communicate is vital, really.
Yeah, I agree with both of you. And I know I said this on the previous episode, but not just focusing on the voice aspect of language. It's still paying attention to their attention, or paying attention and role modeling the listening and all of that sound, and teaching them, like you say, about the mechanics of their mouth and their body. What does body language do? What does gesture do? What other ways are they communicating? And also, I know it sounds a bit weird, but how our body communicates with us as well. And that probably leads a bit more into physical development, or maybe PSED, because what does sadness feel like? Like, children need to communicate, but those are really difficult concepts. And we need to try and teach them abstract concepts to be able to communicate that as well. Like, your body is feeling, maybe your tummy's feeling warm and rumbly and it aches a little bit. What does that mean? Oh, it actually might mean that you're hungry. Well, let's try something out. If we give you a bit of banana, what happens? You're feeling a bit heavy and you don't really want to do anything, and your eyes want to close. What's your body trying to tell you? I think you might need to go to sleep. It's not just about the processing of the language. It's using language to explain the other processes that are going on in their development. It's so much.
And I think a lot of that we can model by being good observers, can't we, and responding to how they are portraying, how they're feeling wherever they are in the environment. If you're playing alongside them and they're giving you cues of how they're feeling, then you can use that time to sort of step away or support them in that moment.
I think we can do so much with modelling. Like, do you remember when you're with children and about 20 of them come up at once and try and talk to you at once? Like, even that is a really nice conversation to have. But like, it's really difficult to be able to listen to all of you when you speak all at the same time. Like, am I able to tune into every one of your voices? Like, having those conversations. And the same as when I think two adults are trying to talk in an early year setting, because they always come and interrupt, and then talking about why that can be difficult, or waiting a moment, and all these sorts of conversations, instead of getting frustrated, which is very easy to do, and I completely understand that, but like involving them in the conversation. And the same for what you were saying about emotions. When you're feeling tired yourself, you're like, I didn't sleep very well yesterday, my body feels like this. Like, it's us that model so many of these things.
Yeah, and again, it's things that we take for granted, because we just know, oh, if my tummy's rumbling, I might need a little chocolate bar. But we've learned that. You're just not born with that. You've learned that to some level, and it's, you take it for granted that actually we should really do need to go down to the basic building blocks of function. Really, it's all about executive functioning, I suppose, and communication is just one way of expressing that and understanding it in a way. Again, we've gone deep, girls. We've gone deep. Look at us.
So much learning.
We love the learning. Are you ready for a game?
Always ready for a
bit
game.
nervous, but yes.
You say that every time, and then you're like, oh my God, Shana, what have you done? This one I don't think's that bad.
Why don't I trust
Well, that makes me nervous even more.
Okay, it's a little quiz. I'm going to say some words to you, and you have to decide if it's a real word or a made-up word. So I thought it would be it's a good way to...
In the English language?
Of course it's the... No, we're going to do it in Spanish. Of course it's going to... But I thought it'd be a good way to sort of demonstrate, like you guys were saying, there's a difference between speech sounds and talking. It's like, yes, you can hear the sounds, but do they make sense? So,
Yeah.
are you ready for your first word?
Always, yes. Let's go.
Okay. Right, your first word is pronk.
Pronk.
Pronk. P-R-O-N-K. Do you think it's
funny
a
how
real
things
word
sound like a
or a
word,
made up word? See, this is the thing. It sounds like a real word. Is it a real word? Or does it just sound like it could be?
Well, that's the thing. What's the difference one? I don't know.
I'm going to say real word.
I'm going to say not real word.
Okay, well, one of you is correct.
Yeah.
It's a real word.
Woo! What does it mean?
Pronk it's a verb that describes a form of leaking, traditionally by four-legged animals with an arched back using four legs. How cool is that? It comes from Afrikaans and it means to show off or to strut. Pronk. How cool.
How hilarious.
I love that word.
Stop pronking around.
Pronking around. Oh dear. Okay.
You're
Yeah,
pronk.
please feel free to try and slip these words into general conversation in your settings.
I don't know how you'd use that word in general.
Let's just see if anyone is brave enough to be like, what did you say? We'll see what happens. Your next word, bumfuzzle.
Okay, that is not a word.
Bumfuzzle.
I'm going to say it is.
It is a real word.
Oh my gosh.
Bumfuzzle. Bumfuzzle is a verb. Again, it means to confuse or to fluster. You know, like confuzzle or bamboozle. It's kind of a squash of those two together. Bumfuzzle. I've bumfuzzled you with this quiz.
Yes, you have.
really have.
I feel bumfuzzled, which sounds very wrong.
Oh, I definitely love this. Okay. Pregret. Pregret. So Pregret. Pregret.
Just going to keep on the not a word.
Well, I'm going
None of them are real.
I'm going to go not a real word only because I've done two real words and I think...
You think the odds are in not a real word?
Oh, really? You would be correct. Yeah. Pregret is a complete nonsense word. I'm not even sure if I'm saying it right, but it doesn't matter because it's not real.
Well, you're saying it right because it's made up.
Thank you. It's always right. Yeah, exactly. Okay. What about the word foop?
Foop. I want that to be a real word.
So it's spelled F-O-U-P-E.
Oh.
It reminds me of those marshmallowy things. What are they called? Floops?
Flumps. Oh my God.
Flumps. You know what? I just like the sounds.
It's a satisfying word, isn't it? Flump.
Yes, and also isn't it very onomatopoeic because it's marshmallow?
Yeah, it does. I do think of marshmallows when I think of the word flump.
I'm going to go real word.
I really want it to be real, but it doesn't sound real.
The point is, none of them sound real, Julia, but that's okay. We'll get to the point of the game eventually. It's a made-up word.
There we go.
Oh, well done.
It's not my made-up word. No, it's not my made-up word.
Made it up.
No, it wasn't me. Apparently, this is, again, I'm not sure if it's entirely true or not, but in Old English, they wrote soup as S-O-U-P-E, and the S in Old English looked like an F because it was quite long and curly, but without the line going through it. So it was like a really long stretch out S. But they mistakenly read it as an F, but actually it was S for soup.
So
Yeah.
It's like a floppy soup.
A floppy soup. Yes.
We're rolling with it.
We're going to keep... Yes, that's totally fine. Okay, let's do one more, because who's got what points? I forgot.
I've only got 2, and I think Lou's got 3.
I've got 3.
Oh, right then. Well, is she going to take it? Or is...
Is this double point moment?
Of course it is.
Is the prize a floop?
A flump. Yeah,
Send
why
me a
not?
flump in the post.
If it mistakenly gets lost in the post / eaten before it gets posted, I cannot be held responsible. Right, fine then. Double points for the last one. Impignorate.
That sounds real.
Impignorate. Would you like me to spell it for you?
Yes, please.
Impignorate. Impignorate.
I'm just going to say no, it's not a real word.
But it is a real word.
Oh no, that means I lost.
No,
I'm
we got
sorry.
3-3.
It's
We
a
drew.
tie, so we'll have to do another one.
Oh, we drew.
Yeah.
This is the tiebreaker then. Unlighten, not enlighten.
I'm gonna
Unlighten.
say no.
I don't think it is a word. I think it's a trick.
Okay, well, you both went for the same option, and you're both right. So it's another tie break. I'm not doing that. You're both winners. Congratulations!
Yay!
I think that was supposed to be it sounds like a real word, so it's not.
Yeah, but didn't seem like a trick because enlighten's a word. So I was like,
Yeah, it was too obvious. It was too obvious. Yeah. Well, there you are. I hope I've taught you some really cool words that people can put into their vocabulary.
Pronk. That was a great sound as well.
Yeah.
We can pronk around. We can pronk around and bumfuzzle our colleagues with all this new knowledge.
I mean, that really sounds wrong. I'm not sure I'm ever going to use bumfuzzle. But pronk, what a word.
Beautiful. I love it. Well, thanks again, lovely ladies. It's been a pleasure. It's nice for us to actually announce that we got a little bonus episode going on here for the Communication and Language mini-series. I know. Little surprise. We're going to be doing a little collab with our wonderful friends over in SEND podcast, which is Send in the Experts, very cleverly worded podcast there, and our EAL colleagues, our experts in there, Talking Their Language podcast. We're all going to get together. We're going to talk about language, and we've talked about the typical development so far, but that's not all of our children that we take care of. What about the other children that have differing or additional needs? They have communication too. What do we do to help them? So we're sending in the experts who taught their language. All right, I'll stop with the puns now. I'll stop with the puns. But yeah, that'll be next episode. So a bonus there. Have fun, recover. I'll see you next time.
Bye.
So that's it for today's episode. I hope you really enjoyed it. If you would like to join in or would like to know more, then come and find us on our social media sites. We have a Facebook page, Facebook groups, an Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, Pinterest, and YouTube. All the links of where to find us will be in our podcast description. Come and join the conversation. And whatever you're doing today, I hope you have a great day.